We left off with Negroes laying down their strategic attack on the Mosley Park white community. Today, we're going to see them come in for the kill, but not before whites lay down their last line of defense. Now let's continue from the 2005 book, White Flight by Dr. Kevin Kruse. Prudence. From their home on Altoona Place, a traveling businessman named Donald Mclean and his wife Alma saw the moving day arrivals as the start of a larger conspiracy. What moving day? This was in September 1951. This was when Negroes finally had keys in hand, ready to take over the freshly purchased property from the white homeowners. And the Mcleans suspected there to be a conspiracy. So they took the issue to court. Indeed, in their lawsuit, the Mcleans drew directly on a middle-class self-image, which emphasized the role of the home as a reward for a life of hard work. The residents in their neighborhood, they claimed, had each
established their permanent home in its present location, in the belief that they could live out their lives there in peace and contentment.
They had done this
at great financial expenditure and personal sacrifice.
And now that they had reached middle age, they did not want to abandon
the sentimental and nostalgic memories of their present home, where they have spent so many happy years.
So other whites should not have sold their properties to Negroes. We understand how simple this is, right? If the memories were so nostalgic and the area meant so much, then none of them should have sold to Negroes. But that wasn't the case. To many of them, individualism and profits mattered more than sticking to the code of the white community. Now let's hear what else happened. Unlike earlier crusades for neighborhood protection, individual homes were no longer the main issue. Instead, the Mcleans claimed rights to the entire neighborhood, which they described as
a completely developed and established section of long standing, with white schools, parks, churches, and shopping centers nearby.
The neighborhood as a whole belonged to them, the Mcleans stated, but real estate agents sought to steal it. And this lawsuit included both white and black real estate agents who they held responsible for this. The objective of this conspiracy, they charged, was
to cause the said public park and the said public school to be turned over to colored persons for their exclusive use, thereby further decreasing the value of petitioners' property and the property of others, and further unlawfully and by means of conspiracy depriving petitioners and others of the use and enjoyment of said public park and school.
In other words, if enough homes in Mosley Park went colored, the school and park would inevitably follow. In an effort to steal their park and school, the Mcleans charged black brokers were deliberately
using the race issue as a weapon and a device to drive down the market value
of white residents' homes. Do I believe the Mcleans? I most certainly do. 1950s and 60s Negroes were the most strategic Negroes when it came to dealing with the whites. So I believe they used every tool they could use to gain any advantage that they could get. There weren't many advantages to be gained, but when they found an opening, I believe they went for it. Their lawsuit accused the real estate agents of spreading rumors that
colored persons will take over at least half the area by January 1st, 1953, and force out the remaining white property owners in another year or two.
Why did he use the word force? Were Negroes coming into the neighborhood with AK-47s making everyone give up their home? No. He says force because the presence of Negroes in their neighborhood was so strong that it left them feeling like they had no choice but to leave. Meaning, all the combined reasons to stay didn't even come close to matching the combined reasons to leave once the Negroes entered the community. That's why he used force. To speed white flight, the unscrupulous brokers were supposedly using a variety of nefarious schemes and conniving practices, including placing ads in newspapers and putting up for sale signs in the neighborhood. Furthermore, through repeated telephone calls, letters, and personal visits, the brokers had asked them directly to sell their homes. Now watch this. As an added insult, their lawsuit charged the agents
caused persons of the colored race to drive slowly over the area at all hours of the day and night, pretending to be searching for houses to purchase, which causes apprehension, alarm, and embarrassment to petitioners, their neighbors, and friends.
hot strategy coming from the 1950 Negroes. Now notice that he said that this was an embarrassment. Why? Because it signaled to them that their neighborhood was going down. If Negroes were riding slow down the block, looking left and right for homes, then that means that they didn't respect that area as a white area anymore. And you might have a Negro neighbor next month. That was embarrassing to the Mcleans and whites who may have had friends over to visit that come from across town. That's one reason they wanted to sue. Naturally, the black firms named in the suit responded differently. The Mcleans had no case, they charged, because property sales could not be restricted by race. Remember, the U.S. Supreme Court caged in the blunt version of the white supremacy entity by removing legal enforcements of racial covenants. So blacks are saying, stop crying because you can't use race anymore. As for the claim that black neighbors would destroy their peace of mind and property values, that was merely a matter of personal prejudice. In the end, the court reluctantly agreed. Listen to what Judge E. Andrews said.
The Supreme Court has already made a ruling in this case, and I can't do anything but follow the rule laid down by the High Court. I must administer the law justly and impartially.
So even if the supremacy was inside of the judge's vessel, it couldn't do anything. It was caged off. Just like today. There's still a decent portion of people who identify as whites that have the supremacy inside their vessel, but it can mostly only manifest in a private setting. If it manifests in public by calling someone the N-word or something like that, and that moment gets caught on camera and published on social media, then ooh-wee, that person's getting fired. Their whole life might go down the drain and get ruined if they let that thing take over the driver's seat. This is what I'm talking about with caged in, like the supremacy likely had to be inside of the judge for him to follow the rules. Now, not only did it have to be caged in by the judge, the white community in Atlanta was learning to do the same thing. They didn't come out wild like the KKK. They did things different. The new group they created, the Southwest Citizens Association, largely resembled its immediate predecessor, the Mosley Park Homeowners Protective Association. Still devoted to the protection of property owners, the new group's name signified a new wrinkle to the ideology of resistance. As citizens, these middle-class white residents asserted certain rights, such as the right of self-government and the right to private property, but also acknowledged certain duties, such as working with city officials to ensure that their needs and the needs of others were met. In a civic spirit, they sought to help their immediate neighbors, to promote the common good of their region, and to present a unified voice in city politics, all part of changing the language and the approach, and all good strategy for the changing time. Now, during this shift, the whites were able to work with the city and use the master tool called the zoning code to build this 6-lane highway, and they also rezoned parts of the city for industrial and warehouse use so they could create this rigid buffer between the black and white communities. Although black realtists resented the buffer plan, they grudgingly went along with it. Why? Practically speaking, they knew the acquisition of more than 700 homes in a fine residential section outweighed the stigma of the buffer zone. And so, after 3 years of bitterness, the Mosley Park problem had found a solution. Here we go. The transition of Mosley Park, however, remained incomplete. Black residents, having moved into more than 700 homes on the neighborhood streets, now spilled over into blocks to the north. By early 1953, the new residents had, as the Mcleans predicted, encircled both the park and school. Negroes moving in for the kill. Now let's see what happens next. The Board of Education, as expected, announced that Frank L. Stanton Elementary School would be used for black students beginning that fall. Bye-bye to the three-story elementary school that housed so many nostalgic memories. It now belongeth to Negroes. Once the school had its racial designation changed, black leaders called for the city to follow suit with the pool and park. They want it all. Brand new socks and drawers. They want it all. So the question to the whites was, what are you going to do when the Negro moves next to you? Ultimately, the park changed hands in April 1954, finally completing the transfer of the Mosley Park neighborhood from white to black after nearly 5 years of animosity and negotiations. And now that blacks own the area, the city ended up lowering the standard for the type of construction that they would not have otherwise allowed. And Negroes complained.
It's awfully disgusting to pay inflated prices for homes in a residential section, and as soon as you begin to get settled, here comes white investors throwing up anything that will get by the inspectors. Juke joints and pool rooms will probably be next. Can't we expect any type of protection from our city government?
Not surprisingly, blacks found this pattern playing out in Mosley Park immediately after their arrival. In December 1952, they discovered that a white landlord on Penelope Road, just 2 blocks on the other side of the park and school, planned to turn her 15-acre plot into a 200-unit apartment complex for whites. Austin Walden complained to the Municipal Planning Board, employing a middle-class rhetoric that resembled that of white residents who protested black encroachments.
The Atlanta Urban League has worked hard and long to provide decent housing and desirable locations for Negroes, and we are naturally opposed to any efforts to destroy the investments of the property owners.
He argued.
To permit the rezoning is tantamount to admitting that Negroes do not have the same right to protection of their neighborhoods as do citizens of white residential sections.
It's the same type of complaint that whites had, but in a different form. Whites worried that Negroes themselves would lower the property values, and Negroes worried that rezoning would create that same type of issue. Both felt that what they had worked so hard to obtain was being jeopardized by some outside force. Now, from here, let's fast forward about a decade later to see how the neighborhood turned out after the transition. Observe. In 1964, the Atlanta Inquirer listed a litany of problems that had accumulated across Mosley Park. Windows broken for years, boards on the pool's deck completely rotten, and ground so untended as to evoke a feeling of disgust.
The general rundown conditions make it hard for a person to believe that this is the same recreational facility that existed when it was tabbed for white only.
The neighborhood went down into the pit. When whites looked at it, they couldn't believe their eyes. For them, the visible decline of the Mosley Park neighborhood after the transition troubles served as a warning. The warning was if blacks moved in, then get ready for it to turn into the trenches. The warning was that if you don't defend your area from black invasion, then what happened to Mosley Park is going to happen to your neighborhood too. That was the word being passed around town. In truth, the steady decay had been brought on by city planners who lowered zoning standards, parks officials who allowed overuse, private companies who slighted the needs of black residents, and the fundamental economic exhaustion of black buyers who bought secondhand housing at prices often 3 times the initial value, and therefore had limited funds for repairs or refurnishings. Now, I want you to be very cautious when you run across these types of explanations, because it does 2 things unintendedly. 1, it reinforces the old slave master talk that blacks are like children and shouldn't be held responsible for anything. And 2, it promotes the emergence of the victim entity. And both of these remove one's ability to think and act independently in certain very important situations. Now, in reality, the decay of Mosley Park was a shared responsibility. The city planners played their part, as Dr. Cruz pointed out, but blacks also played their part as well by purchasing homes at higher prices and by not having the funds to repair these secondhand homes. So the trend today is to keep those people who identify as black in this narrative of not being responsible for anything. And although for some it may feel good in the moment, it does have devastating long-term consequences. It really does. So again, both parties were responsible for tearing up the neighborhood. To white eyes, these causes were hidden. In their understanding, the reason was much simpler. Blacks had moved in and the neighborhood went down. For them, it was no further discussion. The decay reinforced their feelings that blacks were lazy, sloppy, and shiftless. As blacks began to move into other white neighborhoods around town, the specter of Mosley Park remained in their minds as a warning of what residential transition would bring in its wake. Although white residents lost Mosley Park and Ashby Street before it, they gained something of tremendous importance. In their effort to defend the region, they had greatly improved the image of white resistance, evolving from fringe groups such as the Colombians and Ku Klux Klan to more respectable and respected organizations like the Mosley Park Homeowners Protective Association and, more prominently, the Southwest Citizens Association. In moving their resistance into the mainstream, these whites managed not only to legitimize their cause, but to place themselves in positions of influence for the next rounds of resistance. The defense of white neighborhoods was no longer the province of racial extremists seeking to sway the opinions of the working class, but instead, something woven into the worldview of the upwardly mobile middle class, wholly respectable and admired. They made an adjustment. Thus, in the course of a few short years and a few short blocks, the cause of neighborhood defense had been fundamentally transformed. Mainstream whites no longer saw these residential resistance groups as a threat to the image and ideals of Atlanta. Instead, they saw them as legitimate community activists, ones who acted as integral partners in managing the city's peaceful race relations. We've got more on the way, so stay tuned, because it's getting good. So I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.